A long time ago, there lived a wealthy and affluent king in a faraway kingdom. His name was King Inyang. King Inyang had a very beautiful daughter of marriageable age named Afyong. There was no day that passed that young men in the land didn't approach Afyong for marriage, but she always refused all of the marriage offer, both old and young men. Even rich men asked for her hand in marriage, but she called them ugly. She always had an excuse for rejecting this men. Afyong was very proud and vain. In spite of repeated pleadings from her mother, Afyong refused to marry any man from her land. Afyong vowed that she would marry a rich prince from a faraway kingdom. She said the prince would be the best looking man in the entire world. He would be strong and perfect in every way and capable of loving her properly. So, Afyong the princess continued to disobey her mother, and this caused her mother's heart to grieve. One day, there was commotion within the village. What could be happening? People inquired. Not long after, the news got to the palace. A very fine man had been seen in the market who was better looking than any of the natives. Afyong rushed to the market at once. As she approached the market, she saw the most handsome man she had ever set her eyes on. She fell in love with him immediately. She found her way to him and invited him to her house. The prince was delighted and went home with her. On his arrival, the handsome prince was introduced by Afyong to her parents. The prince immediately told them that he had heard of their kingdom and their family. He didn't fail to tell them that they had a beautiful home, beautiful people, and more importantly, a very beautiful daughter. Without wasting time, he asked their consent to marry their daughter. At first, they refused, as they did not wish her to marry a stranger. But at last, after some persuasion, they agreed. He lived with Afyong for 2 days in her parents' home and then said he wished to take his wife back to his country, which was far off. To this, the princess readily agreed, as he was such a fine man. But her parents tried to persuade her not to go. However, being very headstrong, she made up her mind to go, and they started off together. It was a sad day for the king and his queen. After working for several days, Afyong and her husband crossed the border between the spirit land and the human land. Immediately they set foot in the spirit land, strange things began to happen. First of all, her husband's body began to bleed and changing. Princess Afyong became very terrified. She could not understand what was happening to her handsome prince, The prince then laughed at the princess and confessed that the princess was now seeing him in his natural state. He was not what the princess thought he was. The princess began to cry and shout. She wanted to return home, but her husband, who had now become a scary spirit, would not allow this and ordered her to go with him. Eventually, they arrived at his house. They found his mother, who was a very old woman, incapable of doing anything. She could only sit and most times lie down. Afyon was at this point feeling like dying. She regretted her choice of husband. Nothing mattered to her right now but how to get out of this dreamland. But the old woman just encouraged her to cheer up. As this was going to become her life now, she spoke to herself and tried her best to help the old woman. Afyon cooked her food herself and she would fetch firewood and water for the old woman. The old woman was very grateful for this attention and soon became quite fond of Afyong. Several months had passed. The old woman began to feel very sorry for Afyong as she has become old and lean and looking haggard, and the old woman decided to help Afyong. She promised to send her back to her home as soon as possible, providing that she promised that in the future she would obey her parents. Afyong readily consented to do. Then the old woman made her prayers under her breath. While she was making those prayers, Afyong's hair changed into the latest fashion with anklets and other things on her ends. With royal beads and beautiful jewelries, beautiful makeups, and she was looking so flawless. The old woman used her supernatural powers to call a whirlwind to gently carry Afyong to her father's kingdom. Soon afterwards, the whirlwind deposited Afyong outside her home and left her there. When the king and queen saw their daughter, they couldn't believe their eyes, yet they were very excited, and the kingdom broke into dancing and celebration as they had for some months given her up for lost and maybe even dead. There was ongoing celebrations in the kingdom for 8 days and nights. Then one day, amidst the celebrations, the king passed a law that parents should never allow their daughters to marry strangers who came from a far country. Few days after, a prince from a neighboring village came to ask for Afyong's hand in marriage, and the family willingly consented and they got married, living with each other for many years and had beautiful children. The end.